So now we have got the first project presentation session, and as it says on the website, we are encouraging presentations by advanced projects and by the participants above all, so that the participants can get a possibility also to have interchange with obviously all the specialists who are at this summer university, together also with representatives of well-funded projects, like the first one we will hear about in a minute, and get feedback for their own projects, and also see where they sort of position themselves inside perhaps the much broader range of digital humanities. So I would like to welcome, first of all, Konstantin Freibe from the Musikinstrumente Museum. That is the Museum of Musical Instruments of Leipzig Universities. And they have got a project which is funded in the framework of the Horizon 2020 project. You know that it's a huge European framework project, and the lucky people who actually got in there, it's very, very difficult actually. So Konstantin will present the project READ, Recognition and Enrichment of Archival Data. He is himself a collaborator of this project, and he has got an MA in Master of Arts, MA in Cultural Studies, if I'm not completely mistaken. Okay, Konstantin, I'm very happy that you're here, and the floor is yours.
Thanks. Yes, hello, and thank you for the kind words. I hope the microphones are working and you can understand what I'm saying. As mentioned before, I work for the Musical Instruments Museum in Leipzig, which is associated with Leipzig University. And maybe I should open my presentation at first, so everyone gets a chance to follow. This seems to take a while, and I hope someone would jump to my side to help me while I continue talking about my fantastic project, which is, as mentioned before, the project READ, which deals with, recognition and enrichment of archival data. And first of all, I'd like to state that the position I'm assuming with this talk is one with a very limited perspective due to my educational background as hybrid between cultural history and sociology. So someone who expects me to explain the deeper technical features of the project might not be happy with what I can reply, but I'm prepared to at least state some keywords. So from this limited perspective, I decided to outline my presentation as follows. Oh, that was one too many. So this is the outline, and at first I'd like to start with as much general information as possible. So that's why I put facts and figures at first. The mission in point 2 states the goals of the project, which is an attempt to summarize, well, the goals READ is aiming to achieve. 3, that deals with target user groups, which are important to understand the interdisciplinary and collaborative approach of the project. 4, key performance indicators is an attempt to show how READ tries to measure its research progress. And 5, obligations is, well, some kind of summary of external criteria that have to be met in order to, or had to be met in order to receive funding. All these first 5 points stress structural and organizational information, but I try to allow you to locate myself within this structure. And after 5, when we approach archival documents, you might, I hope so, get some insight into my daily work, which will lead us to the tools and services provided by READ. So moving on to the facts and figures, maybe sometime soon. Well, it's not displayed, I might as well just talk about it. So READ started on January 1st, 2016, and is supposed to end on June 30th in 2019. It received about 8.2 million euros from the Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Framework, and is working with 13 partners, one of which is Leipzig University. All these partners are organized by the University of Innsbruck, which is the center of the project, not only for the computing problems, but for everything else, in fact, as well. But aside from these contract partners, there are also associated partners which are associated via, via Memorandum of Understanding. One of those partners is the Musical Instruments Museum Leipzig, the place where I work. And that's about the most general information I can provide. So we will change the machine, and I will continue talking as if nothing happened. So I provided general information, and the next step I announced was the next step was to talk about the mission. READ's mission is to increase the accessibility of archival documents to nothing less than revolutionize handwritten text recognition technology and to establish virtual research environments. So these keywords are my attempt to sum up the goals of READ. Well, so imagine you're a humanities scholar and you have some questions towards historical documents, and you have to deal with these physical documents. So physical documents have the not very benefactory feature of being very fragile, and they require a special environment in order to be preserved. And well, the prospect of a digital primary source is because of its increased accessibility, very promising for scholars as well as archives, because their physical material is put out of harm's way. So let's just find the right slide. That's here. So as I said, these 3 points, increased accessibility, HTR, and virtual research environments, are what I say sums up the mission of READ. So, who are the contributors and benefactors for this project? And these are first memory institutions. I call this memory institutions, but I mean, in fact, to be more precise, archives, libraries, and museums. So, organizations which are content holders and which are tasked with collecting, preserving, and providing historical documents. So their collections have to be preserved, and to put them, as I said, out of harm's way. A virtual research environment is very useful, I think. But this is not the only target user group. There are also humanities scholars, computer scientists, and last but not least, public users and volunteers. Humanities scholars, as I mentioned, and this is your chance to locate me within the structure. I would be between memory institutions and humanities scholars. Humanities scholars ask questions and try to find answers in these documents, but in order to do so, they need a certain infrastructure which has to be provided by computer scientists. Their research is what makes possible the establishment of virtual research environments. The public users and volunteers are nonetheless important, even if they are not professionals or small-scale content providers. They're important because they provide testing data, which is important to increase the performance of the HDR engines. And maybe they can accumulate large amounts of text. Well, one example I'd like to see research in the future is, for instance, letters by soldiers during World War II. So many people private people have lots of letters at home, but don't have the time to transcribe them or anything. And since many soldiers wrote letters in this span of time, it would be an unbearable effort for a single person in a single lifetime to achieve this goal. So crowdsourcing might be the method of choice. Moving on to the key performance indicators to see how well READ is doing. These are the three I'd say are most important. So at first, publications. READ is expected to have an output of 15 to 25 scientific publications every year. Reference data, which is composed of 3 million images with at least 50,000 pages of reference data, which might be the complete and correct transcriptions of a text, for instance. So this is the number expected to have achieved after the completion of the project. And competitions are increasingly popular way to measure progress, and these are organized at various conferences. Maybe you can come up with some of those. So these are what I think are key performance indicators, but they won't be much good if you can, not being able to pay for the measures needed to assess the progress would be bad. So you have to comply with some rules given by the H2020 grant agreement. They are specified in numbers, but I prefer not to go too much into detail and instead state the rules given for the work of READ. So if something is published in form of a paper or something like this, it must be provided open access. So any user with internet access must be able to access those documents. The same goes for the reference data. As I mentioned before, the data generated is to be stored in a repository and must be made accessible for third parties. Software has to be provided as open source, but it's not an obligation resulting from the H2020 grant agreement, but more from the e-infrastructure call made by the EU. So, and now that we've kind of finished what I see as structural or organizational information, let's try an excursion into my work. So, how am I approaching archival documents? At first, I have a target document format, and this is an example of those. These little snippets of paper contain only few informations. These document types are semi-standardized, so you can't expect them to have always the same layout or measures. As you see here, there's printed letters as well as handwritten writing. So OCR and HDR technology has to be applied. But in general, this document doesn't look like much. But imagine being inside the museum. This is one of our exposition rooms in the Grassi Museum at Johannesplatz, Leipzig, not far from the opera. So this room is dealing with local influential music instrument makers. And imagine that all these instruments here and in the back, and in general everything musical instrument-wise you see on this picture contains these little snippets inside. So in order to identify the documents, you somehow have to get inside. I will try to illustrate this here. So on the left-hand side you see a violin. That's to illustrate the targeted documents are located inside violins. They are also in lute instruments and instruments from other families, but I'm dealing especially with those. And you would have to look into these openings at the top side to see only a glimpse of the document. So what this means when dealing with just these instruments is opening them, and especially instrument handling, is nothing for me, since I'm theoretically a scientist and not practically an instrument maker. So handling and advice like this requires professional help, or I need to find alternatives to identify the documents, and such alternatives could be existing collections of those snippets, prints, or already digitized images. So I tried to do these, and in coming next I will try to develop a workflow and locate myself within this, so you can evaluate my progress as well. So I finished identifying the documents located within the museum server, which contains images of all items in the collection. And I am now working on the digitization. So I identified about 4,356 images containing 11,722 signatures. But this is pretty wide, and I will have to narrow it down. In this step, I'm not able to apply Reed's tools because I have to go through some stages of quality assurance. For instance, the image quality has to apply certain standards in order to be machine readable. This is dealing with computer vision. So I'm halfway through digitization, and I'm pretty eager to finally use the great tools Reed provides, which I will discuss next. So at first I will begin with what I think is the strongest tool, Transcribus. Is designed or intended to be a web API which allows users unsupervised automated training and transcription of archival documents. So images can be uploaded there, and then the training process begins after 50 pages of segmentation, transcription, and character recognition. The software should be able to identify, for instance, the written text itself, or what here is called here writer-hand retrieval. So it should be able to recognize who wrote the text. The success rate is estimated to be 80% and higher after a thorough training phase. So I'd like to try that. Next is ScanRead, which is intended to be a mobile app which allows users to digitize documents, but here I might stress again my limited perspective. So I'm just a small wheel within this huge project, and I can't evaluate the progress regarding this app, but as far as I understood, you just need a mobile device and take a picture, and this app will allow you to upload it and process the image according to the standards. And the last tool and service I'd like to mention is the e-learning app, which is a software intended to help users decipher historical handwritings. So if you imagine people who are dealing with archival documents have to transcribe manually during the training phase, it would be very helpful if they are able to read what they are supposed to transcribe. So this is probably very useful, and again, I'm very eager to try that and get better at reading historical handwritings. For now, that would be the end of my talk, and I would invite you to visit these web spaces. And if this was too fast for you, at first I want to thank you for your attention, and you can contact me, and you can find this presentation under the following the link below. And I guess these were 20 minutes, and now I'd say it's question time.
Thank you very much for this talk, which also allowed us some insight into your position inside a really huge project, and what are the conditions and limitations sometimes as well. Mm-hmm. So now, open for questions. I've got one question straight away. Can't you go into these instruments with a camera?
Yes, endoscopic cameras could be of use, but there could be handling issues, and those instruments are sometimes 500 years old. So giving me an endoscope and just letting me stick it inside the instrument might not be too healthy for the instrument, so I still need professional help, especially regarding handling of the instruments.
Yeah.
Because
I thought perhaps, I mean, in medical surgery and things like that, they employ such a lot of these types of instruments already. So could these be transferred to
probably
other type of research? Yeah?
Could be, but it would still require some training, of which I received none.
Okay. Perhaps the project should have thought about things like that, actually.
That's right.
Okay, so yeah.
I was wondering if you could give a presentation of the interface. Do you have it here?
Well, I'm online already, so maybe I can just open the...
We have only very short time, so perhaps it's better to have questions first, and then look at the interface. So I would rather see, are there other questions, and then look at the interface, perhaps? Nobody has got another question? All happy? Okay, then let's look at the interface.
Okay, so it's following this link, so maybe if you're not satisfied with my demonstration, which will be improvised, you can try on your own again. So let's see how that works. So as we see, it's an open beta stage. So much for improvisation. I actually just downloaded it, but never used it. So maybe I might have to register, which would be annoying right now. But I don't know, maybe you'd like to take a look inside the how-to guide, because there will be illustrations. At least I'd expect that. And well, but it's up to you. I don't want to force you to read this. So it's okay. Let's take a look. Okay. Well, so it's a work in progress. Well, this is embarrassing. No images.
There was a link to register. Okay, you didn't go to register.
Yes, and even if I did, I would have forgotten my login data. So it would consume too much time. Well, there are some images. So yeah, that's installing advice. Well, this could be something. So this might be the user interface. So It's composed of several tags. So the metadata enrichment is already semi-standardized. So the tagging has already, for tagging purposes, you already get some, what's the word? Vorschlag? Yeah. So Transcribus will propose some tags, and you can choose from them to annotate the text you're dealing with. And below that, you might see something at a slightly advanced stage. So there's on top, in the top center, there's the image, which is to be transcribed. What we don't see here is the segmentation, because the layout has to be analyzed manually during the training phase and increasingly automated depending on how well the training went. So it's not paragraphs, lines, words, and after this layout analysis and segmentation, the character recognition can take place. And this all these stages will lead to the transcribed text below. And that might be pretty much it. There will be the opportunity to create a repository for all the transcribed texts, and as far as I can tell, there is the possibility or the option of collaborating with others, of sharing your repository with other people or institutions. So I hope that's at least the start.
Does it work with English?
So the partner institutions associated with READ are across the EU. So one enormous, large-scale use case was from the University College England, transcribe Bentham. It was crowdsourced, and people were invited to transcribe handwritings of the mentioned author in order to help a digital edition of Bentham, I guess. And that worked pretty well in English and not only in German. But the other use cases I have in mind are in German language. So, but it's might be most elaborate in this language, but is not limited to.
So, just perhaps a question. This Transcribus can be loaded down, and people can try it actually?
Yes, that's the open beta stage it's in right now, but it is intended to be in web API, so you can access it online as a web service.
So people who have got letter projects, I could try and use it. So that would be probably the best way to find out the functionality of it, actually. Yeah? So thank you again very much for this interesting presentation.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.